Not all pain needs sound. Some pain simply exists. It spreads through the air like a light mist, dense enough to be felt even by those who don't believe in feelings. Room 409 had that kind of silence. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of something that didn't yet have a name. Everything there happened slowly. Minutes felt longer, and even the sound of footsteps in the hallway seemed to soften before crossing the doorway. It was as if time itself knew there was a limit to be respected, the one before the final breath. Helen Moore was 81 years old, advanced cancer, no clinical options left. She had been in palliative care for almost 2 weeks. No visitors. She didn't talk much. Her only request was simple, that her bed face the window, and that the morning light be allowed in, unobstructed. Every day when the nursing team adjusted her position, she softly said, "Please let the light in." There was no pleading in her voice. It sounded more like a gentle goodbye, like someone who had accepted the end, but was still waiting for one last message. Helen wasn't the type to complain. Even with constant pain, she never pressured this staff. She accepted her medication with a small nod and was thankful even for the simplest gestures. Her gaze was deep, serene, giving the impression that she saw something no one else did. The nurses often commented among themselves that there was a different peace in room 409, and that Helen, despite her condition, seemed more alive on the inside than many who passed through with lighter diagnoses. The young nurse Rachel had recently been transferred to the night shift. Still unsure of the protocols, she carried a rare kind of sensitivity. She liked to talk to patients, even when they didn't respond. She understood that sometimes silence was simply the most delicate way of saying, "Stay here." And with Helen, that's exactly what she felt. In the early hours of Thursday, just after 2 a.m., Rachel entered the room for routine procedures. The lights were dim. Helen was asleep. But something felt different in the air. A new kind of lightness. A soft scent that didn't come from any diffuser. Rachel moved slowly, checked the vital signs, and then she heard it. Helen was murmuring something. It wasn't a groan, nor delirium. It was rhythm, phrases, as if she were listening to someone and repeating what she heard. Rachel leaned in a bit closer. She wanted to believe it was just a dream, but when she listened more carefully, she realized it sounded like a psalm. Not the whole thing, just scattered fragments. And then came a sentence whispered with clarity. "I heard it, and it wasn't from here." Rachel felt a chill run up her neck. She looked around. The hallway was empty. No sounds, no chaplain, no visitors, no devices playing audio. And yet, Helen kept whispering, a faint smile on her face, as if she were being guided by something, or someone. In the morning, at the end of her shift, Rachel returned to the room and found Helen awake, eyes fixed on the gray sky outside. She asked how she was feeling. Helen replied naturally, "I'm..." Hearing it again. The same voice. It reads slowly, with authority. And when it finishes, "I feel like he's here." Rachel didn't know what to say. She simply picked up her clipboard and left quietly. But something inside her had changed. This wasn't normal. It wasn't psychological. It was spiritual. And though she couldn't explain it, she knew that from that night on, room 409 would never be the same. If you know someone who's hospitalized, facing a silence the world can't hear, write their name in the comments. Or write your own, because maybe, just like Helen, you too are waiting to hear a voice. Not human, but divine. And if this story touches your heart, share it. Let's turn every comment into a prayer, every name into hope. But what Rachel didn't yet know was that Helen would hear that voice one more time. And this time, the words would change everything. Since that night, Rachel couldn't walk into room 409 the same way again. She had the feeling that something sacred lived there. It wasn't fear, it was reverence. Helen remained calm, but there was a new expression on her face. A subtle light in her eyes. A peace not of this world. When Rachel asked how she felt, the answer was always the same. "He's still reading to me." always at night, and always the same words. Rachel didn't question it. She simply listened. She had learned to perceive that some things were real, even if invisible. Helen spoke with such certainty that doubt had no room. As the days passed, other members of the team began to notice changes. Helen's oxygen levels remained low, but she seemed less and less worn. The attending doctor remarked informally that she had never seen a terminal patient with such tranquility. On a Tuesday afternoon, Helen received a visit from a nursing technician named Danielle, who had just returned to work after several weeks away. Danielle had a restless heart and a sharp curiosity. As she stepped into the room, she was greeted by intense silence and by Helen's gaze, fixed on her like someone recognizing something. "You've come back, haven't you?" Helen said with a soft smile. Danielle froze, surprised. She didn't recognize Helen. She had never taken care of her. "I'm sorry. I think you've mistaken me for someone else." Helen shook her head slowly. "No, your presence feels familiar. Maybe you were one of those who prayed for me, without even knowing it." Danielle felt a tightness in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but those words felt true, as if somehow her soul had crossed paths with Helen's long before that physical encounter. Later, when sharing the experience with Rachel, Danielle confessed something even stranger. "I heard something odd when I walked out of the room, a voice, but not in my ear. It was like a sound coming from within, as if someone were reading, softly. I thought I imagined it. But now, after what Helen said," Rachel took a deep breath. It wasn't the first time she'd heard something like that. So she told Danielle what she had witnessed days earlier. The two of them sat silently for a moment. Then Rachel said, "If it's real, then this woman is hearing heaven every single night." The next day, Helen seemed especially connected. She spent the entire morning with her eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. When Rachel came in to check her vitals, she heard the elderly woman whispering scattered phrases, verses, words like path, joy, presence. "Do you remember where those words come from?" Helen opened her eyes slowly and replied, "I don't know the number, but I know the sound. They come from a place where pain doesn't exist, where everything is clear, and where he promises, 'I am not alone.'" Rachel left the room with tears in her eyes. She had never felt that before. A mix of beauty, truth, and a longing for something she didn't even know she missed. She began to wonder if there really were parallel realities, not in a scientific sense, but in a spiritual one. Dimensions where love is so present, it reveals itself in words, and maybe in psalms. In the hallways, rumors about Helen began to spread. Some nurses avoided the room, hesitant. Others came in discreetly just to see her. There was something different about her, something unseen, but deeply felt. Helen, in turn, seemed surprised by nothing. When asked about people's reactions, she responded calmly, "They'll understand in time. God speaks to each person when they're ready. For now, he's just preparing me to go. But before I leave, there's still something I need to deliver." But no one in that hospital could have imagined that this something would come through an unexpected visitor, someone who would bring the key to identifying the psalm that had been read to Helen every night. St. Clair Hospital had a little-known tradition, deeply felt by those who moved through its halls with spiritual sensitivity. Every Monday, volunteers from the local community were invited to visit long-term patients. The intention was simple: bring presence. Among the most devoted volunteers was Grace Ellison, a woman with a gentle voice and old, unwavering faith. At 62 years old, Grace was a widow with no children and said that God had given her a new purpose: to comfort the forgotten. That Monday, Grace was assigned to visit 3 rooms in Block 4. The third on her list was room 409. She had never been there, nor heard of the patient. When she knocked gently and entered, she immediately sensed something different in the room. It wasn't heavy, nor cold. It was dense, as if the air carried memory. Helen's eyes were closed, but she was awake. Her expression was one of deep peace, as if walking through a silent, vast field. Grace approached with respect, laid her hand on the blanket, and softly said, "My name is Grace. Can I sit with you for a little while?" Helen didn't open her eyes but replied, "Yes, dear. They've been expecting you." The response, though strange, didn't feel like delirium. It had weight, as if the words hadn't come from her mouth alone, but from somewhere higher. Grace sat beside her, pulled out a Bible from her bag, and began to read softly from the Gospel of John. After a few minutes, she offered a short prayer, asking for peace for Helen's soul and guidance for her spirit. When she finished, Helen opened her eyes. She stared at the ceiling and murmured, "That voice. It's similar, but not the same. The one who visits me, he sings, not with melody but with authority, and the words are ancient." Grace furrowed her brow. She wanted to understand more. "He sings?" Helen smiled, as if every verse were a step. "He doesn't just read, he carries me with him while he speaks." Grace, then, had a sudden thought. She pulled out her notebook and asked, "Do you remember any of the words you heard?" Helen closed her eyes, as if reaching deep into the memory of a dream. Then she spoke, slowly. "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy." Grace wrote down every word. Something about that verse felt familiar. She stayed there for a few more minutes, holding the patient's hand, then said goodbye and promised to return. That night, back home, Grace searched her Bible for that verse. She flipped through Proverbs, Isaiah, the Gospels, but it was in the book of Psalms that the verse appeared. It was right there, almost at the end of the chapter, Psalm 16, verse 11. "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Grace's heart raced. That was it. What Helen had heard was Psalm 16, a deeply spiritual text filled with promise, refuge, and eternity. But the most astounding part was, no one had ever read that psalm to her. No one had mentioned its number, and yet, she heard it. The next day, Grace returned to the hospital earlier than usual. She walked into room 409 with her Bible open and sat down with the same reverence. Helen was awake, looking out the window. Grace didn't say anything right away. She simply began to read, verse by verse, from the beginning to the end of Psalm 16. Helen closed her eyes and let a single tear fall, not from pain, but as someone who recognizes a reunion. When Grace finished, Helen said in a faint voice, "That's it. That's exactly it. That's the song. That's the path he keeps repeating." Grace held her hand tightly, overcome with emotion. Now there was no doubt. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't delirium. It was visitation. And that psalm had been sent from heaven before ever being read on earth. She left the room in silence, her heart pounding and eyes brimming with tears. Little did she know that very night, the psalm would be read again, but this time, the entire hospital would bear witness. And it was during this next reading that something happened, because the promise contained in the words of Psalm 16 was about to begin its fulfillment. The next morning, something hovered over the hospital like a soft veil. The hallways were quiet, even with the usual exams and visits. The sunlight felt gentler, almost respectful. In room 409, Helen was weaker, but not diminished. Her eyes remained open for shorter periods, and her words had grown scarce. But whenever she spoke, everything else paused. Rachel, who had been closely following the case, talked to Grace about what she had discovered the night before. Together, they decided it wasn't enough to simply know which psalm it was. It needed to be read with reverence, with intention. And that afternoon, they set out to do just that. They called the hospital chaplain, a humble man named Bill Andrews, known for his calm presence. Bill didn't know every detail of what had been happening, but he understood the importance of the moment. He entered the room with his Bible open, and Rachel, Grace, and Danielle gathered around Helen's bed. With her eyes closed, Helen held between her fingers a small handkerchief, the same one she had brought with her from the very first day. Bill stepped closer, took a deep breath, and began to read. "Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you. As for the saints in the land, they are the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight." Helen breathed slowly. With each verse, her expression became more peaceful, as if she were being led down an invisible path. "The sorrows of those who run after another god shall multiply. Their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out or take their names on my lips." Rachel noticed Helen's heart rate remained steady. The monitors showed calm, but the air was heavy with something no equipment could measure. "The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance." Danielle, emotional, clutched a small crucifix in her hand. She too heard something, not with her ears, but from within, as if the reading mirrored her spirit. "I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken." Helen then opened her eyes. Slowly, she looked at Rachel and whispered, "He is here. Therefore my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption." The final words came as a definitive breath. Bill concluded in a firm voice, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was worship. Helen closed her eyes again, but now, with a gentle smile. If this psalm touched your heart, the same way it touched Helen's in that hospital room, write your name, or the name of someone you love, here in the comments. Someone who needs to hear these words from heaven. Let's form a living chain of faith, where each name written becomes a silent flame igniting hope, even in life's darkest rooms. Prayer inspired by Psalm 16. Lord, may your word be more than just sound. May it be direction. Let Psalm 16 lead every weary soul back to the path of joy. Let no one feel abandoned, and may everyone who hears this prayer find shelter at your right hand, where eternal pleasures await. But Helen's journey wasn't over yet, because before she left, she would leave behind one final sentence, a sentence that would transform that hospital room into something no one ever imagined. Helen passed away in the early hours of Sunday morning. It was Olivia, one of the night shift nurses, who found her. When she entered room 409 around 4 a.m., everything felt at peace. The hallway light still poured through the cracks of the door, reflecting softly on the white sheet. The machines attached to the patient were silent, and the only thing left was presence. Not the presence of someone, but of something. Something that had passed through and left invisible marks. Helen lay with serenity. Her arms rested across her chest, and her breathing had stopped so gently it could have been mistaken for a nap. But there was something else. Beside the pillow, carefully folded, was a small piece of paper, torn from a hospital notepad. Olivia called the attending physician, who confirmed the passing with care and respect. But it was only afterward that the team noticed the content of the note. Written in firm, slightly trembling handwriting were the words, "I heard a voice no one else heard, but it spoke to me, and it led me home." Rachel was called as soon as she arrived for the morning shift. She read the note in silence, twice. Then she sat in the chair beside the empty bed and wept. Not with despair, but with the kind of gratitude that only exists after witnessing a quiet miracle. She knew. They all knew. This wasn't a metaphor. That voice had been real. That guiding presence, too. The hospital leadership allowed the note to be framed and left in the room, along with a small plaque featuring Psalm 16. The message wasn't just a farewell, it was a legacy. In the weeks that followed, something began to change. Nurses and patients started visiting room 409 even when it was unoccupied. Some just stepped inside and stood in silence. Others knelt for a few minutes, whispering prayers. The cleaning staff requested that nothing be moved, as if the atmosphere needed to remain untouched. There were testimonies. A palliative patient, transferred to room 409, said she dreamed of a gentle-voiced woman reading verses to her at night. A staff member claimed that while changing the sheets, he clearly heard a phrase whispered into the empty room: "You are not alone." Others said they felt an unusual peace there. The word spread across wings, shifts, even visitors. There's something different in 409. What was once just a number in a hallway became a symbol. The hospital began receiving requests from families wanting their loved ones to spend their final days in that room. Not because of any special medical equipment, but because of the note and what it meant. The story began to move beyond human control. A clinical space became a sanctuary. The pain that had once permeated the place gave way to a sacred expectation that something unseen still lingered, whispering psalms, collecting prayers, and guiding farewells like someone bringing a song to its final note. But no one expected that sentence to go beyond the hospital walls. Because what Helen experienced in silence would become a shared testimony across states through someone who never even met her. A few days after Helen's passing, St. Clair Hospital made an unusual decision. There was no press release, no ceremony, just a simple notice posted in the hallway. Room 409 reserved for silence, prayer, and reflection. What was once a clinical room, with technical markings on the wall and the repetitive beeping of monitors, now carried a different meaning. The bed was replaced with a comfortable chair. The lighting was softened. The side wall received a small framed print of Psalm 16 in script font. Below it, in gentle letters, the sentence Helen left behind. I heard a voice no one else heard, but it spoke to me, and it led me home. On a small corner table rested an open Bible. Beside it, a wooden box filled with paper and pens. Anyone could write the name of someone they loved, or a prayer, or just a word. There was no ritual, no supervision, only intention. The hospital didn't call the space a chapel, but that's what patients began to name it. Some called it Helen's room. Others, the place where God still reads aloud. And over time, healthcare workers started visiting the room during hard shifts. Doctors who had lost patients stopped by for a few minutes before leaving. Nurses left anonymous letters with phrases like, "Today was heavy, but I still believe." Families in mourning would ask for permission to sit there. Many didn't say anything. They just stayed, breathing, letting the silence fill the space where once there was only despair. One day, a 9-year-old boy, accompanying his grandmother through chemotherapy, left a note that said, "If God read to the lady who died, can he read to my grandma too?" From that moment on, no one doubted anymore. Room 409 was no longer just a number. It had become an extension of heaven in the hallways of pain. There was no music, no sermons, but there was faith, alive, present, and silently eternal. The video telling Helen's story was recorded almost unintentionally. A volunteer named Miriam, who had heard the accounts at St. Clair Hospital, felt a stirring in her heart and decided to share a brief testimony on her personal profile. She recorded it with her phone, no filter, no script, just speaking with a trembling voice about the woman who heard a psalm before dying and left behind a phrase that felt like a prayer. She ended the video, saying, "Maybe the voice that read to Helen is trying to read to you too." The video spread quickly. It started among Miriam's friends, then reached local churches, Christian pages, prayer groups. In just a few days, it had thousands of views and was being shared through WhatsApp and under devotional videos. It was as if the story was being carried by something not of this world. Then, among the many comments, one began to stand out. It came from a woman named Angela Parker, a resident of Springfield, Illinois. She wrote, "I was praying last night for my mom, who is unconscious in the hospital. During the prayer, I heard inside of me a phrase that gave me chills. She heard a voice that no one else heard, but it was speaking to her. I thought I imagined it, until I saw this video today. I'm in tears. Now I know my mom is not alone. The message spread like wildfire. Hundreds replied to Angela's comment with prayers, testimonies, words of encouragement. Others began sharing similar experiences, dreams, sensations, memories. It was as if Helen had opened something, as if her story had become a channel, a bridge between the seen and the unseen. Rachel, upon reading the comment, felt the weight of everything she had lived come rushing back. In that moment, she understood. Helen wasn't just a patient. She had been chosen to carry a voice, to be a witness to a God who still speaks, who still visits, who still reads psalms to those at the edge of death and turns the end into a seed. Inspired by the power of that phrase, some people began writing letters like Helen's. Letters addressed to those who had passed, or to those still fighting. Letters written as if God himself would read them aloud, in someone's room. Many of those messages were posted in the comments of the videos, and today form part of an invisible chain of intercession. A network of faith, with no human structure, held together by a single certainty: someone from heaven is still reading. If this story reached your heart, maybe it wasn't by chance. Write in the comments, "Speak to me, Lord, as you spoke to Helen." And if there's someone in your life who needs this peace, someone who is fighting, waiting, or feeling alone, write their name below. Let this comment section become a collective altar where each name is a seed, each phrase a prayer, and every act a breath of miracle. And if what you felt during this story can't be explained but can be shared, leave a like. That simple act may be the bridge between this message and someone who needs it more than you know. Because maybe the psalm that was read to Helen is still echoing in hospitals, in homes, in hearts, and maybe, right now, it's being read to you.